Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that it's probably going to be a second before the next tutorial because I just recorded a bunch of content, so that's why I'm pumping them out pretty fast. The next one will probably be the gloves. I can probably get that out in the next few days, and then the boots. But the bodysuit, it's going to be a minute because I still got to puff paint the whole, the arms and the back and the belt and stuff. I already got the chest done, which is kind of the hardest part of that because that's what needs to look the best. But of course, we'll sew the bodysuit, sew the gloves, sew the boots. Those will be separate tutorials. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know it's probably going to be a minute before we get on to some of the next tutorials. So I hope you enjoyed the sewing tutorial. I'm going to do a voiceover for it. It'll be my first time doing a voiceover, so hopefully it works out well. And yeah, enjoy. Alright, so first things first, we're going to sew the back of the neck. We're going to flip these pieces on top of each other to sew them together. You usually do that when sewing. So you just line them up. They match perfectly, or they should. And then you're gonna go ahead and put it inside your sewing machine. Of course, that is a zipper foot on there. It kind of helps you get closer into the webs. So as you can see, I have the edge of my zipper foot right on the edge of the line that's traced on the back of my web. I showed that in the puff paint tutorial. So we're gonna go ahead here. This stitch is a zigzag stitch with a width of 2 and a length of 2. I'm just making sure that my stitch ends right on the outside of that web line. So when we unfold it here in a second, you'll see that it looks really nice and it's all clean. So make sure at the beginning to back stitch after you first start. That kind of like ties a knot. So like go forward a few stitches, go back a few stitches, and then you can go ahead and go all the way down the side. Alright, and then we're going to backstitch there to make sure that that seam is nice and secure. Go ahead and trim it so you don't have to later. And then as you can see there, the webs are right against the vertical web line, just how we wanted. So that's why we sew against the web line like that. Alright, and then the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is sew the chin. So we have these two seams here. We need to fold them over and make sure that the point at the top is perfectly folded in half along with the rest of the seam. I personally don't use pins or basting stitches. I totally recommend you do when you first start. It's just, I don't do it that way. I know ATX Spider doesn't use basting stitches either, but it's just an experience thing. It just takes time to be able to do it like that. So we're going to go ahead and put our fabric in our machine, and now we are going to, this is on the other side now, you notice, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we still stay right on the outside of that line, and that's how we get that nice finish with the webs going together. So back stitch right there at the beginning of your seam, and then we're going to go ahead and go all the way down. Alright, this is a different clip, but I wanted to show how you need to go all the way down over the edge in order to get that nice, sharp seam that blends in with the mask. And then you can just trim it off. Don't trim too close because it is a nice sharp corner. And then you can see here the corner looks nice and sharp. It might take a few tries, but you should be able to get it. Now we're going to go ahead and sew the seam on the top of the mask. You just got to kind of fold it over, same as the chin seam basically, and then put it in your sewing machine, and we're going to run it on down. So make sure to go forward once again, and then do your back stitch. Make sure that this seam at the back, the like sharp point of it, is nice and lined up. I'm just making sure all my webs are aligned here. It's always good to check. You can usually feel them if they're puff paint. Using pins or basting stitches would help with that. So make sure to stay against your seam line here. I know you can't see in this clip really, but you know, it's the same as the chin. That's why I put the chin clip first. I did sew this part first though. So we're just making sure to go really slow, making sure all the webs are lined up and stuff like that. You can do that with all your pieces. It's really important on the side of the head. So we are going to go all the way down. It's one of those parts where you do need to go over the edge since it's a sharp corner. And you can tell when you fold it in half. I guess it would be called a dart. And then back stitch back over top of it, and of course trim it off. And you can kind of see there's a sharp corner on the edge right there. So this part is going to be the same as the other one, it's just the other side. There's two of those on the top of the head. And I just did that to avoid a seam going down the middle of the head, because that's kind of obvious when you're wearing a face shell. And you may notice that I'm doing it on the other side of the lines sometimes. That's just to make it easier on myself. Also, I'm starting with the side with the dart, once again, just to make it easier on myself. It's kind of hard to get it through my machine to begin with, but it's fine. And then of course you just want to back stitch and then make your way down. You can see how we went over that corner right there, and it goes right to the edge of the seam, all the way over the seam allowance. So once we make our way down here, we are just going to make another back stitch, and then we'll be finished with the front and back of the mask. Then we just got to sew them together. The sides can be a little difficult, but I think after a few tries you may be good. What's good about the zigzag stitch is if you have a seam ripper, zigzag stitches are pretty easy to remove. That's why I use them, but they're pretty durable as far as just wearing them. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and sew the back of the mask to the front of the mask. This is probably the most straightforward part of the mask. The mask is one of the harder parts of the suit to sew, but I think it's not that difficult as long as you take your time with it. And like I said, you can always remove the stitches as you mess up, so be sure to use a stitch that you can remove easily, such as this zigzag stitch. Alright, now make sure you just line up the seams on the back of the mask with the webs on the front of the mask, and then the webs on the front of the mask with the seams on the back of the mask. So it's kind of like mismatch, if that makes sense. And so we're going to go ahead and backstitch like normal, and then you're just going to go all the way down the seam, making sure you're aligning the vertical webs with the seams on the other part of the mask. And as you can see, it's not perfect, but for the most part, the webs do line up with the seams, and the seams do line up with the webs. So that's how we can get like that fully hidden seam look on our mask, besides like the top of the head seam. Now for the hardest part of the mask. Really look closely for this. So we're going to sew that all the way down to the back of the mask. So how we do this is we line up the two bottoms with each other, and then there's going to be a dart at the top of the seam. So that's where you sew over top of the seam allowance to make sure that it's a sharp corner at the end. So as you can see, you go all the way down. So as normal, the seam starts out pretty easy. When it gets curvy, it's going to get a little harder. So we can start going, as always, stay against our marker line for the web, so we don't go over it and sew over top of our webbing. And that's why the zipper foot is really useful. So we're going to go ahead and go all the way down here, and now as it starts curving here, really make sure to take your time and not stretch the fabric with your hands, because that'll make your webs not align. If you do mess up a little bit, you can always stretch the top fabric or the bottom fabric into place to make sure your webs do line up. And then just make sure to hold these pieces of fabric together as you're sewing. You can use pins. I find this seam to be a lot easier without using pins. A basting stitch might honestly help. I just don't want to take the time to do it because I can make it look good anyway. So yeah, just make sure to take your time with this. Also, puff paint sticks to itself, so if you line up your webs together, they should stick to themselves, and that should help out a little bit. Here's that dart I was talking about, and we are going to make sure to fold that in half. I was really taking my time on this one because it kept fighting me, but yeah, really make sure it's folded exactly in half so the web is hidden behind the seam, or the seam's hidden behind the web, vice versa. And we are going to just go down and finish this curve, and then go all the way over the seam allowance once again to make sure we get a nice sharp dart. You can see I'm messing with it again just to make sure it's perfect. I can't stress how much it is important to make these look good, as when you wear a face shell, it'll be really obvious if you messed up on these because they'll like kind of stick out like horns a little bit, just very slightly, but it's important to get it right. And as you can see here, the seam turned out pretty good. Not all the webs are perfect. It's really hard to get the seam perfect. But where it matters, it does look pretty good. Down on the neck, they're a little misaligned, but you know, you'll have that sometimes when sewing your own suit. As far as hemming the mask, I'm not going to do it right now. I might show it, but later I think I'm going to do a really cool thing where I'm adding a separating zipper on the back of the neck and then a separating zipper on the inside of the suit, so I can kind of have a hood mask that I can just pull off, because I think that would look really cool. So you can hem your mask now if you want, if you don't plan to do something like that, but I just want to make sure that I have the option to. So I'm not going to finish it quite yet, but you can also just choose not to hem it since it's going to be tucked in anyway. Alright, now we have the part that everyone stresses out about the most. It really isn't that bad. You just need to pinch the fabric, put it on a face shell, or you don't even really have to do that because the pattern I gave you actually does have an eye hole template. So just pinch that little circle on the pattern and then just snip it off. And then of course you can put on the mask and trim it a little bigger so you can see better. That's what I did afterwards. But you can see it's really not that hard. It shouldn't fray at all. Spandex usually doesn't do that if you have a nice quality spandex. This spandex was only literally $8 a yard, so I'm going to assume most spandex don't fray. But just make sure when you're putting on your mask, please don't grab it by the eye holes. Grab it by the back seam or the chin or something. Alright, now we're all finished. Now all you gotta do, put on your face shell. If you don't have one, obviously you don't have to put on your face shell. And then just make sure you see the two chin seams right here. And that's the best way to get this mask to slide on really easily. So you just kind of put it on your forehead, and then you just pull back. And then just pull down, and you'll see the eye holes literally come right over top of your eyes. Like, my mask pattern is sewn in such a way that it's actually a shape that is meant to go over a head. So you can tell that, it actually goes right over your eyes as soon as you pull it over. You don't really have to adjust it too much. And then, of course, just throw on your lenses. You're probably going to have to adjust your masks. I'll get some Glamor Shots after this, so, you can kind of see what it's supposed to look like. But, yeah, I hope that helps. And, time for some Glamor Shots.